Om Shri Sai Ram. Namaste and a very warm welcome to all the participants. Thank you for joining us for the day 2 noon session of the webinar Lit Treat. I am Sai Archana Murthy, a member of the faculty, Department of English, SSS IHL. Literature enables us to reach within and connect with our inner selves. It teaches us to harmonize with nature and the life around us, to be a river and not a swamp, to be grateful for every little joy and to share your abundance. These gems of thoughts relevant today come from literature and they stimulate spiritual growth. So in this session, we first have a literary conversation titled Scholar Gypsy as a Symbol of Spiritual Growth in Matthew Arnold and Iris Murdoch. Matthew Arnold's sustained magnificence and richness in English poetry is seen in the long poem, The Scholar Gypsy. We have all grown to remember Arnold best for the status he has given to poetry when he tells us, "We will turn to poetry to interpret life for us, to console us, to sustain us." In the same vein, Iris Murdoch, a postmodern British novelist, continues to be regarded in high esteem because, like all great novelists, she is interested in the universals. She is interested in what makes us human, in our flaws, ego, and guilt. But Murdoch also spurs us to appreciate the little joys in life and to come back to these questions again and again that fuel our progress in the spiritual paths. In this session, Dr. Mithali Khanna and Dr. Dibba Bhargavi, assistant professors in the Department of English, SSS IHL, will be in conversation with each other. Both of them hold PhDs in English literature and have nearly a decade of teaching experience. Dr. Mithali is engaged in research related to postmodern poetry, poetics, Eastern, Western, and cognitive. Dr. Bhargavi, who will also be joining us in the conversation on Iris Murdoch, has completed her PhD in the area of modern and postmodern fiction with focus on select novels of Iris Murdoch. She supervises doctoral research scholars on postmodern critical perspectives, narratological studies in Iris Murdoch, etc. With this, I welcome Dr. Mithali and Dr. Bhargavi to begin their conversation and shed light on a few literary insights. One note to all of you before we get started. If you have any questions for the presenters, please type them in the chat box below. I will present the questions to the speakers at the end of the session. Now over to you, Dr. Mithali and Dr. Bhargavi.
Om Shri Sai Ram. Salutations to our founder chancellor Bhagwan Shri Satya Sai Baba. Greetings and Sai Ram to all eminent educationists and enthusiastic participants. Francis Bacon called his essays dispersed meditations, and so has been our journey through the dispersed tales of meditations, rendering counsels and morals to our eager minds. We have reached the last lap of the spiritual voyage through the 2-day sessions, where I am sure we will find ourselves inspired to begin a journey within. Growth is inevitable, and to grow is the very purpose of our lives. But growing with an awareness of our growth is spiritual. And if we understand mere scholarship as growth, then according to Hazlitt, it is lack of common sense, because only great attainments without philosophical speculations and awareness of common day activities cannot make one wise. Amidst the humdrum of competitive struggle and individualized lifestyle, we, the mundane scholars, have become oblivious of the true import of scholarship, which, ironically, the so-called uncultured gypsies seemingly have grasped, and they wait for the heaven-sent moments to teach us too. So, allow us, Dr. Bhargavi and me in the next 1 hour to transport you to the world of gypsies. Dr. Bhargavi?
Thank you, Dr. Mitali, for that thought-provoking introduction. Growth is indeed inevitable, and to be aware of that growth is undeniably the very purpose of life. In my humble opinion, there is neither failure nor achievement at the end of life. There is only awareness, which is a product of experience. And literature exquisitely mirrors this complex human experience, which is at once poignant, erratic, magical, instinctual, and impulsive. Various characters in literature have been instrumental in portraying this human experience and driving home profound insights, gypsies being no exception to this. With their uncanny ways of lifestyle and the mystery of their art, gypsies have also been portrayed as symbols of secret wisdom. For today's discussion, we wish to highlight scholar gypsies as symbols of spiritual growth in the works of two eminent writers, Matthew Arnold and Iris Murdoch. Matthew Arnold is a versatile British poet of the Victorian times, and Iris Murdoch is a prolific postmodern British novelist and philosopher. Before we proceed with the discussion, let me first answer the question, why these two authors? Well, it is because they both address anarchy and the crisis of modern times, though they belong to two different periods. And more interestingly, their works are modern in spirit and spiritual in vision. So here is a quick outline of our presentation. After introducing Arnold's and Murdoch's gypsy characters against the historical context in which they are created, we shall move on to enlist the various popular interpretations of Arnold's poem, Scholar Gypsy, and Murdoch's novel, The Message to the Planet, highlighting our distinct understanding of the same. We will then talk about the commonalities in both the authors, especially their portrayal of modern man's predicament and their profound vision. The last and the detailed part of the discussion would elucidate the important spiritual insights that the gypsy characters exemplify or call for, thus validating them to be the symbols of spiritual growth. To conclude, we shall sum up these insights and reiterate on the significance of the webinar title.
Who are gypsies? How are they perceived in society? What role do they have in literature? And what roles do Arnold and Murdoch give to gypsies in their works? We all know gypsies as a wandering race, pitching tents for a brief period, living by itinerant and fortune-telling. We also know them as mysterious, peculiar, and free-spirited beings engaged in exotic dance and music. And also, they seemingly possess some psychic powers. They were first spotted in Europe in the mid-16th century and were called gypsies because Europeans mistakenly believed they came from Egypt. But the linguistic and genetic findings revealed that gypsies are basically Romani people, an Indo-Aryan ethnic group having their ancient roots in the northern Indian subcontinent. 1500 years back, they are known to have traveled from India, and since then, they have been traveling all across the world. We are also aware of a general intolerance towards gypsies in society. In many regions, they were forced into slavery, some countries ordered their expulsion, and some considered them as racially inferior.
As literature is a study and reflection of life, from Shakespeare to the present times, we can find the portrayal of gypsies taking a very significant place in literary tales. Sometimes, they unassumingly enter the tales to break the continuity of regular narration, and sometimes a significant epiphany or an introspective pause is introduced with their peculiar, enchanting, and magical presence. For Shakespeare, a gypsy is an Egyptian charmer. For Ben Jonson, an entertainer. Wordsworth romanticized gypsies alongside the other subjects of his poetry. However, in the Victorian and the modern settings, these gypsies become more a part of the society, sometimes represented realistically with their uncanny acts, and sometimes as a symbol of preceptors from the other world, as we can find in the works of Arnold and Murdoch.
Matthew Arnold, a poet, critic, and humanist, and the prominent voice of the Victorian times, stood apart from the other writers of the age in not being typically Victorian. His works rather reverberate with a prophetic voice that warns the Victorians of spiritual alienation in their materialistically complacent society. And his gypsy characters play a significant role in assuming this prophetic voice. Victorian England perceived these gypsies as the uncultured others. However, Arnold deconstructs this idea of gypsies and demarginalizes them, calling them the cultural others. He actually, in many essays, deems his own role in the society as a gypsy's, that of a cultural other. The other who is estranged from the society, not to escape it, but to transform it. And this is precisely the role he has given to his gypsies in his poems. In fact, he has swapped the roles. Man is the uncultural other, and gypsies are the cultural ones.
Cultural others, that sounds an interesting expression. Because gypsies and Jews in Murdoch's novels are also similarly referred to as outsiders. Murdoch, in her fiction, portrays their predicament in modern society, thus kindling a sense of empathy. Interestingly, her prophetic philosophical voice is also at times assumed by these outsider characters who play a crucial role in imparting the ultimate wisdom to the world. In a way, like Arnold, even she demarginalizes them in some of her novels. Actually, in Murdoch's fiction, there are references to gypsies in three different manners. 1. Characters who are real gypsies, represented as harbingers of trouble, ominous, intimidating with their typical shabby attire, eyes cast down, and tangled black hair, as in the Sand Castle. 2. Characters who are Jews that are referred to as outsiders or gypsies, as in The Philosopher's Pupil. 3. Characters who are not gypsies but have the characteristics of gypsies, as in The Message to the Planet. The third category is what I would focus on for the presentation, drawing insights from her gypsy-like scholar character in The Message to the Planet, which sketches him in an exotic garb with more than human charm, indeterminate and undetermined, shrouded in the world of obscurity and mystery like a gypsy. The three categories of gypsy portrayal show not only the development of such characters, novel after novel, but also the evolution of the author's consciousness in the process of comprehending the complex human psyche.
Even in Arnold's poems, there are three kinds of representations of gypsies. And interestingly, the portrayal of gypsies is very autobiographical. In the poem To a Gypsy Child, the tender gypsy is symbolic of Arnold's stoicism and skepticism, while in the poem Resignation, gypsy is the image of an ideal poet resigned from the worldly activity. But in his most central poem, The Scholar Gypsy, gypsy is a symbol of spiritual growth, estranged yet involved. These three ideas of gypsies represent the three phases of Arnold's growth, from a skeptic and a stoic individual to a romantic poet, ultimately to a transcendentalist. For the discussion today, I would like to draw spiritual insights from the poem The Scholar Gypsy. Let me give you a gist of this poem, which was published in the year 1853. The poem's The Scholar Gypsy is based on the story narrated in Glanvill's book Vanity of Dogmatizing. The story is of an impoverished Oxford scholar who leaves Oxford for good, joins a band of gypsies, and learns their lore. In the first section of the poem, set against the pastoral background, the speaker is trying to trace Scholar Gypsy, who is believed to be seen in glimpses amidst nature. The second section of the poem echoes anticipatory modern crisis and also contrasts the confused life of modern man with the simple life of Scholar Gypsy.
The Message to the Planet, published in the year 1989, more or less revolves around Marcus Waller, a Jewish mathematical scholar who suddenly vanishes into a state of oblivion. His favorite pupil Ludens later finds him amidst the woods in Red Cottage, meditating on the key to ultimate wisdom. Marcus is a breathing presence in the life of other characters, indirectly driving them to turn within in order to find solutions to crisis and confusion. His mysterious death towards the end establishes the uncanny gypsy-like scholar that he has been all through the novel. The novel has received mixed reviews by some critics. While it was appreciated as yet another typical Murdochian novel, it was also criticized as pessimistic. Suguna Ramanathan calls it an extraordinary achievement and of all Murdoch's 24 novels, the largest in scope and most powerful in thrust. However, Broyard, an admirer of Murdoch's novels, said, "I still don't know whether it is a great novel, a merely interesting one, or an unclassifiable pandemonium." In his study of Iris Murdoch's fiction, Peter Conradi wrote that The Message to the Planet was a lesser novel but with some memorable scenes.
Much criticism has been written on the poem The Scholar Gypsy. Some critics call it a criticism of the Victorian society, while others study in it the modern dilemma. Some have contrasted the ideal life and the real life, while others have highlighted the close kinship between the external nature and the inner nature. Some critics mark the melancholic and despondency tone of the poem, calling it a pessimistic poem, while others focus on the aspect of hope as symbolized by the gypsy.
I find that both the authors are commonly criticized for being pessimistic and melancholic. Well, at least with Murdoch, it is partly justified. She belongs to the age that witnessed, to say the least, the most unprecedented horrors in human history, the two dreadful world wars that led not just to loss of lives, but a sense of purpose in man. Fear, anxiety, confusion, and contingency have undeniably scarred the psyche of the modern man. Murdoch's characters frequently recall this muddle and confusion in their lives. Gildas says, "As for deep foundations, what a hope! Our lives rest upon contingency, rubble, rubbish. There aren't any foundations except mud and chaos." Irena, in the later part of the novel, says, "What's all right anyway? How am I to know? How am I to know anything? My life is a puzzle picture with no solution." Murdoch's fiction extensively portrays the modern crisis and the divided psyche. But despite the projection of the intensity and magnetism of evil, Murdoch considered her novels as works full of happiness. In my opinion, she isn't a pessimist because her works resonate with her belief that life's fulfillment can be attained neither by goodness nor by evil, but by an understanding that both coexist. Before I discuss that, it makes me wonder why Arnold, who belongs to more gentle times, has had a pessimistic view of life. What exactly was his perspective of modern life predicament?
Well, yes, Arnold's times was certainly not as catastrophic as Murdoch's. Nevertheless, the ground for anxiety, confusion, and the wars was laid during Arnold's times itself. Arnold focused on the impact these would have on man and thus addressed the Victorian mind. While other writers were busy representing the reality of the times in terms of materialism and scientific achievements, Arnold envisioned the future of such a deceiving reality. The second half of the poem is a detailed characterization of his vision of a modern man. Referring to the modern man, he says, light half believers of our casual creeds, who never deeply felt nor clearly willed, whose insight never has borne fruit in deeds, whose vague resolves never have been fulfilled, for whom each year we see breeds new beginnings, disappointments new, who hesitate and falter life away and lose tomorrow the ground won today. Life of modern man rolls from new beginnings to new disappointments, to shock to dejection to despondency and again back to new beginnings, which accompanies changing aims and aspirations, conflict of passion and hopelessness. Arnold called this as the disease of modern life, with its sick hurry, its divided aims, its heads overtaxed, its palsied hearts. Of course, his poem Scholar Gypsy offers a panacea to these ailments. Scholar Gypsy urges the readers to turn towards the outer nature and inner nature to be freed from the languid doubt and fatigue of the modern times. Arnold's vision of turning within is based on his belief that the true, authentic hidden life of an individual is connected to the hidden life of nature, so that one revives the other. Like the Scholar Gypsy, one recovers and secures oneself by withdrawal, by removing oneself into the life of nature, which has its own current and influence. He calls this as general life. In the calmness of this general life, one not just recovers but also gets prepared to receive the wisdom of nature, which nature reveals to him in the moments of epiphany and makes him aware of his inner quest. For example, in The Scholar Gypsy, the reader is transported to the countryside pristine landscape that echoes with the live murmur of a summer's day, bleating of the folded flocks, distant cries of reapers in the corn. And he is mesmerized with the beauteous forms and sounds of nature. And then the speaker calls him out, "Come, shepherd, and again begin the quest," thrusting him into his inner life. These extremes highlight Arnold as a poet calling attention to internal nature, and Arnold as a social critic laying more stress on action and questing.
So does Murdoch. She says that one has to give attention to nature in order to clear our minds of selfish care. In the novel A Fairly Honourable Defeat, the dialogue between Morgan and Peter stands a testimony to this. Peter says, "Well, nothing in the world is intact and precious and absolutely beautiful. Everything is contaminated and muddled and nasty and slimed over and cracked." Morgan replies, "Something is good, something is. This is." She lifts up a feather-leaved stem covered with tiny wet flowers. Each flower was purple above and blue beneath, and very faintly striped as if the color had been drawn in by repeated strokes of a very fine pen. Murdoch, in her philosophical work, refers to this self-forgetful pleasure in the sheer alien, pointless, independent existence of animals, birds, stones, and trees. Referring to turning towards nature, she says, "I take this starting point not because I think it is the most important place of moral change, but because I think it is the most accessible one. Here, we find Murdoch's advice on refining inner nature by paying attention to external nature. Attention, which means a just and loving gaze directed upon an individual reality, is an idea she borrowed from Simone Weil. Such objective attention, which is an exercise of justice and realism, and really looking, leads to perfection. However, for Murdoch, the idea of perfection is nothing but an increasing sense of direction.
The idea of perfection has been extensively discussed even by Arnold. In fact, the vision of turning within is based on his idea of culture, which he defines as a study or a pursuit of perfection. While addressing Victorian complacency, Arnold resorts to culture as the only solution to the anarchy in the society. For him, culture is scientific and social passion combined. He says that scientific passion is a desire after the things of the mind simply for their own sake and for the pleasure of seeing them as they are. And to see things as they are implies a balance and regulation of mind. This would help us augment the excellence of our nature and grow internally. Arnold emphasizes on just being and not seeming. That is the scientific curiosity, pure and unsullied, Arnold emphasizes in order to turn within. But culture is not just the mere endeavor to see and learn the truth for our own satisfaction. It is also an endeavor to make it prevail in the society, which gives culture social and moral character. Social passion for doing good is an important aspect of culture. Love for neighbor, diminishing humans' misery, a noble aspiration to make the world a better place, having an impulse towards helping and caring, and all this not for institutionalizing social service, but as Arnold says, to make reason and will of God prevail, to aim at harmonious expansion of the whole humanity along. He further adds that the perfection that culture aims at has sweetness and light, that is, beauty and intelligence as its characteristics, as against hideousness and rawness of our nature. To sum up in one line, culture or perfection is an inward spiritual activity having for its characters increased sweetness, increased light, increased life, increased sympathy. And indubitably, the scholar gypsy is the symbol of this inward spiritual activity.
Having discussed the very similar vision of both the authors, we now wish to highlight their gypsy characters as voicing the author's vision, as symbols of spiritual growth, and as those who help modern man come out of the labyrinth of modern predicament. From the understanding of Arnold's and Murdoch's vision, we have arrived at the three-level process of spiritual growth: growing individually, doing good to others, and doing good for nothing. Thus, growing from individual consciousness to social consciousness towards a cosmic consciousness. The lives and the acts of the gypsies, either as examples or as catalysts, highlight this very process.
Let me begin with the very first stage, that is, growth at an individual level, and bring out insights from the character of Scholar Gypsy as a symbol of individual consciousness. The very first insight that we can cull out of Arnold's poem is just being in the company of nature. The growth occurs naturally. He stands for Arnold's belief of establishing a connect with external nature in order to turn inwards. Once the scholar left Oxford, He found his home in nature and never returned to Oxford and his friends. The writer says, but rumors hung about the countryside that the lost scholar long was seen to stray, seen by rare glimpses, pensive and tongue-tied. He lived every moment in nature, reveling in the beauty of nature. As Keats said, truth is beauty, beauty truth. Beatific forms of nature reveal the eternal truth, and we can see this gypsy garnering eternal wisdom from the intimate kinship with nature. Serenity, tranquility, equanimity accompany him wherever he goes. The nature imagery is so intertwined with his presence that it seems that he has literally become one with nature and is growing with nature's wisdom, as expressed in the lines, and thou hast climbed the hill and gained the white brow of the Cumnor range. Another very important point from Gypsy's life is that his impoverished condition was not an impediment for his true calling. That he couldn't continue in Oxford did not leave him dejected. He did not lose hope, rather trusted his calling and joined the gypsies. And his openness to embrace a new kind of lore of gypsies guided his way ahead. We need to be open to the new ideas, new pathways in life, or else we will be where we began our journey. Steadfastness is another quality of the scholar gypsy, which helped him meditate on the very purpose of his life. He had one aim, one business, one desire, which helped him become one with his inner self. Now, if it seems that his flight to nature was nothing more than a romantic escape, then we would have missed to see closely his keen observations of things around and how quickly he makes his decisions. In the lines, turned once to watch while thick the snowflakes fall, the line of festal light in Christ Church Hall, then sought thy straw in some sequestered grange. At the foot of the Cumnor Hills is situated the Oxford Tower, a hub of urban allurements. While climbing the ranges of Cumnor Hill, he does stop to observe the sheen of festal lights, symbolic of the attractions of the material world, but in no time makes his choice, prefers a dried straw of grass to the material world. Waiting is another important concept discussed in the poem. Scholar Gypsy has been waiting for the sparks from heaven to fall on him, waiting for the will of God to prevail, waiting for the divine directions, waiting to accept God's will, and most importantly, waiting with hope, with faith in the higher powers.
Murdoch's gypsy-like scholar inspires the other characters to turn inward and transform themselves. While the novel introduces complacent characters, for example Gildas, who in the beginning of the novel preferred a pleasant vicarage and his prestige and his choir an easily earned salary to the ordeal of facing the truth, becomes an individual aware of the inevitability of evil and mystery of life. The characters in their journey with Marcus are drastically transformed into resilient characters by the end of the novel. Jack, referring to his regained painting ability, says, "It's awful, but at least I can try. I should fight my way out of a sort of charmed circle." In fact, by persistently following the gypsy scholar in order to discover him, the characters end up discovering themselves. This is how Murdoch's characters go through the individual growth, which is the first stage of spiritual growth.
In the second stage of doing good, individual consciousness expands to social consciousness, since empathetic concern is a natural attribute of an internalized self. Arnold's social passion of doing good, to have an impulse to serve others and aim at harmonious expansion, is very well delineated in this poem. When the scholar gypsy chance meets his friends from Oxford, he tells them, "And I," he said, "the secret of their art when fully learned, will to the world impart, but it needs heaven-sent moments for this skill." His readiness and willingness to share his knowledge with the world is the very first step in developing social consciousness.
Social consciousness in Murdoch's novel is portrayed slightly differently. Luden's dialogue, "We just live in bottomless chaos and have to help each other," seems to resonate the importance of doing good to others. In fact, Marcus Waller, like Arnold's scholar gypsy, is referred to as a great world revealer, who is waiting to share with the world something written in the heavens. Shockingly, the novel makes the characters realize that there is no other and proves to them that, in truth, an ultimate message, in the sense that we understand it, does not even exist. Marcus himself emphasizes on this. However, the journey with Marcus and the idea of the message becomes meaningful because it helps the characters discover, if not sight, perhaps then certainly blindness. They do not get to the truth, but they become aware of illusion. As Jack says, "It's as if I were blind, as if I discovered not sight, but blindness."
Okay, doing good is one thing, but doing good for no gains in return is not only service in true sense, but also raises an act to the stature of something divine. So, in the third stage, social consciousness expands to cosmic consciousness. Doing good for the sake of goodness will lead one to Arnold's perfection. Arnold stresses upon the idea of disinterestedness, an objective approach to know things as they are, and a disinterested study of human nature and experiences to achieve a detached purpose of doing good leads to harmonious perfection. Disinterestedness is a very essential attribute of scholar gypsy. He just by being is an inspiration to the modern man. His pure acts, when contrasted with those of modern man, themselves serve them as inspiration to do good, be good, and see good. The scholar gypsy intended to spread his knowledge just for the sake of sharing it, expected nothing in return. However, he is waiting for the sparks from heaven to fall on him, with the only purpose of making the divine will prevail in the society. So scholar gypsy, by doing good for nothing in return, becomes one with the cosmic consciousness.
Murdoch's fiction and philosophy also emphasizes on being good for nothing, in the sense, being good for no reason. In the novel A Fairly Honorable Defeat, Julius King says, "Rupert didn't really love goodness. He loved a big, imposing, good Rupert image. Rupert didn't die of drowning. He died of vanity." This implies that goodness ceases when a motive exists. In a conversation with Ludens in The Message to the Planet, Marcus recalls the poem "The Rose is Without Why." He explains that a description of the rose means nothing unless, as in poetry, it can be the rose. Same is the case with goodness. One has to be good for no reason, like how a beautiful rose blooms for no reason. Marcus Waller in the novel and Scholar Gypsy in the poem of our discussion thus subtly raise the consciousness of the characters and readers by making them aware that the only way out is the way in.
This process of spiritual growth from individual consciousness to social consciousness towards cosmic consciousness is very close to the Indian concept of Vyashti, Samashti and Parameshti. Bhagwan Sri Satya Sai Baba in many of his discourses has reiterated the idea of the spiritual journey from without to within. I find it most relevant here to recollect Bhagwan Baba's thoughts on this process of spiritual growth. He says, and I quote, "Without Vyashti, that is individual, there cannot be Samashti, that is society. Without Samashti, there cannot be Srishti, that is creation. So, first of all, we have to recognize the role of Vyashti. Only then can we understand the principle of Samashti, which will, in turn, lead to the understanding of Srishti. One who understands Srishti becomes one with Parameshti, that is God. In fact, the principles of Samashti, Srishti and Parameshti are very much present in Vyashti. Hence, one has to make efforts to understand Vyashti in the first instance. There is not much difference between the individual soul and the cosmic spirit. So long as Vyashti identifies himself with the body, he leads a very ordinary life. It is only when he identifies himself with Samashti can he understand the principle of creation." I unquote.
To conclude our discussion, I wish to quote one of Murdoch's characters who says, "Upon the poet now rests the responsibility for the continuance of metaphysical wisdom as lived experience. Truly, era after era, these visionary writers have portrayed this everyday ritual called life with all its joys, complexities, and exuberance. And in work after work, these authors subtly inspire us to be spiritedly involved in life, at the same time, objectively witness it from a detached distance. Indeed, what else would a spiritual life mean if not spiritedly participating in the ritual of life? And what else is a better medium than literature that can give one a snapshot of such wisdom? Thank you, one and all, for your eager participation and patient listening. Thank you.